Hi there. This is a state of the industry video for Warner Brothers video game division, which I've split off from my main state of the industry video on Warner Brothers Discovery as a whole. But I felt there's enough critical things going on with this division that I wanted to give it its own standalone focus, which also means I have to go for brevity, so I'm trying to keep this short. This is a Westeros franchise dedicated channel. There are video game news dedicated channels which have covered all of their ups and downs in more depth. Please check those out. But for the Game of Thrones franchise people, if you're new to all of this, I want to give you a basic idea of what's going on and that there's problems with this. And the conclusion is they really need to sell their video games division, because of all of the major streaming platforms or media corporations, movie studios, Warner Brothers is really the only one that still has its own in-house video game company, WB Games. Like, Disney doesn't make its own Star Wars games or Marvel games. They've licensed those out to dedicated third-party developers who can also do a better job. That's how this works. And with the buyout 2 years ago by Discovery, when they bought Warner, merged to make Warner Discovery, they really don't know what they're doing, and the smarter move would be to do that, to sell it. But to cover everything in order here, they did make some big video game announcements spring of 2024, so almost a year ago. They actually had a big open panel about these are our plans for video games going forward. And as it happens over Christmas, a big new mobile game for Game of Thrones came out, Game of Thrones King's Road. And other Westeros YouTube channels have reviewed this, like Red Team Review, Glidus. I'll link you to their videos. They did a better job than me, and did an overview of how Game of Thrones has almost never had a good video game. Like, the one that we'd actually consider presentable is the one by Telltale Games. That was like tied in with season 4. They actually did a decent job. And as Glidus says, how much of a compliment is it to say that it was good for what it was? But they had real writers on it. They were trying, lore-wise, it made sense. And we were annoyed when it got canceled. But we've never had, like a really good top-tier game like other franchises get. And there were just false starts, or they treated it as just let's slap a label on something instead of developing something real. And they really criticized this King's Road game, or some thought it was okay, but dude, it's a mobile game. And the real point is, they already explained this last year, and I actually made a video on it. I did report on this. There was a big article in Variety where they explained what their video game plans were going forward. And they said, if you think about it, a top-tier real tie-in game, something on the scale of, like a BioWare thing like Mass Effect or Dragon Age, those take 3 years to make, 3 or 4 years development cycle. And given that we're just making video game plans right now, they openly said, do not expect a real Game of Thrones tie-in video game before like 2027 or 2028. That's just how long normal development takes. If they did it sooner, I'd accuse them of rushing it, and it'd probably be pretty crappy. And in that article, they openly said, until then, we're going to churn out some cheap mobile games. They're not even going to be that profitable, much less good quality, as glorified promos just to keep the name out in between seasons, to keep it in the public consciousness. Now, hopefully it's a good mobile game, like, just a Candy Crush with Game of Thrones label slapped on or whatever. Or I'd prefer like a Fallout clone or something. A Fallout shelter, but you're managing a castle on the wall. I'd play that as just a knockoff game. And they said it's just glorified promos. And objectively, I understand and agree with the logic behind that. That they said, what, we're going to churn out something by next year that's, like a real game? No. But by next year, we could have a tie-in mobile game, a clone of something, get the name out there. So I do think the problem is that they overhyped they put out too many prominent trailers for Game of Thrones King's Road. It should have been just, hey, here's a new thing in the mobile store. Versus they treated it like it was a real, platform video game when it isn't. So they don't overhype things, but don't, judge us for what it is. It's a cheap knockoff mobile game, and they said our plan is just to get the name out with, like mobile stuff or whatever for the next few years. I don't have a problem with this. They already said that what their plan is. I hope that their long-term development plans for, like, we're going to get a real game 4 or 5 years from now, I hope those are in place behind the scenes. Only time will tell. The bigger problem, though, again, on that front, it's too early to tell. Just development cycles take a long time. Bigger problem is with Warner Brothers games as a whole, as part of this industry report here. Now, even in that thing last year, they did say, our plan is to cut back to focus only on 4 core franchises, because the industry is volatile now. 4 core franchises. Harry Potter, DC Comics video games, Mortal Kombat, and Game of Thrones. We haven't had a Game of Thrones game yet, but we've had for the other 3. That when the Harry Potter video game came out, Hogwarts Legacy, that earned them $1 billion. It was Game of the Year. Year after that, DC Comics' Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League was a mega flop. I have reported on this in earlier videos back in August. Not revenue, net profit loss on Suicide Squad was $200 million. It was a mega flop. Like, this is one of the, on the short list of the 5 mega flops of the past 20 years. It was the biggest mega flop, one of the top 5 in 20 years. This was that bad in terms of the money they lost. But then, just last Christmas cycle, Mortal Kombat 1 was a well-received, good-selling game, so that's there. Thankfully, more channels than mine have gone over the ups and downs of how did this mega flop Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League happen. Again, in the video description, I'll link you to those. But there was mismanagement at every level. It was overdue for 7 years. And this isn't even Discovery's fault, Zaslav's team. No, this was before the buyout, well before that. And it's just due to a lack of oversight. There's a lot of follow the leader in video games, which doesn't make sense when you have a long development cycle. That when the original Suicide Squad movie came, with Will Smith and everything, which the bad edit, we need a director's cut, all of that argument, but when it was being promoted in trailers, they thought, wow, this will be a mega hit, let's make a game based on it. And you don't know how good it'll be, and we won't even be able to make a game for at least 3 years. Like, you can't anticipate that. This was like 2016, and then it just kept getting remade and remade. It was in development hell. It's a textbook case of shifting priorities, lack of communication, and then they just started copying other games. Like, they said, like, the pivotal questions of even the developers were asking, we have Captain Boomerang, who his whole shtick is he uses trick boomerang weapons. Why are we giving him upgradable guns? Like firearms. Why does Green Lantern have a customizable car he can fly? That kind of thing. And they were all over the place, and then tonally they were clearly ripping off the movie, and yikes. So, the biggest failure of Suicide Squad, beyond all of that, or really the root cause behind that, and it wasn't, chasing woke stuff or popular, it was, the biggest fad they were chasing was, let's make it a live service game. Now, you have games that you buy for the story, like in Dragon Age, Mass Effect, you play through, it's a single-player game. Then you have things that are really more for the multiplayer suite, like people who play Halo for the story, then people who get it for, I'm just in for the multiplayer. The big example is Destiny, that they were trying to ride the coattails of Destiny and that game series. And we're going to make it a live service game because that's an ongoing subscription. That it's not a one and done, you buy it and it's done, that people will keep paying for the subscription and paying for upgradable weapons and vehicles, when the Arkham Asylum verse for DC Comics is a story-driven thing, mostly single-player. The development team, and they shifted development teams, more detail on that in the other videos, but they said, we don't even know how to make a game like that. We're not that kind of development studio. So you can't have, well, we really want it to be a multiplayer thing, then hired people for the story, and then they deprioritized the story part. And then treat it as a selling point from the people who made the wonderful story behind the Arkham Asylum verse. This is just awful. But, well, we want it to be a service because we want more money. We want it to be a live service. Worst of all, though, was purely from a point of practicality, as the developers desperately tried to tell them, we don't have the infrastructure to have a 24/7 live service multiplayer game. Because that means you have to have servers running 24/7, which you need to maintain, much less customer service that runs 24/7. So you need a server farm, you need calling for all this, you need someone to manage the purchases. That the example I think of is 2 or 3 people might be able to run a corner gas store. But there's a difference between that and just the economy of scale of I'm going to found a gas company on this to rival ExxonMobil. Like, you mean with heavy infrastructure, with refineries, and a fleet of logistical transport, and just all the other heavy infrastructure and personnel logistics associated with something on that scale. And they were just going, but look how much money live service games make. Whereas the developers are going, yeah, we don't have the scale to achieve that. There's a minimum threshold, is the word I'm looking for, of what you need to put in before you get money out. So Suicide Squad failed because after hyping it as it's a live service game with no live service support or logistics, that was the top complaint. You really don't have the infrastructure to support a game like that. And they thought they could just do it on the cheap. So many are arguing, given the money trouble that Warner is in, they should sell their video game division. Particularly because for every Hogwarts legacy, they've also had a Suicide Squad. And I know there's arguments about this both ways. It's just, yes, if they get one hit, it could make $1 billion, but it's hit or miss. For every Barbie movie they've churned out a Joker 2. It's gambling. And the smarter move, particularly because they're desperate, particularly because they don't really know how to run it, is to sell it. And it is estimated that if they sell WB Games, they could get $5 billion cash in hand. Guaranteed right now. When Warner overall is something like $35 billion in debt. And the real money driver isn't the games, which are hit or miss. For every hit, there's a flop that cancels it. The real money driver is their Max streaming service and its international spread that lets pump more money into expanded episode orders for that. They should do that. Every market analysis article I've read says they should do that. It's the smart move. We're not sure if they're going to do it, however, because they have huge plans for the Harry Potter franchise, that this will mint them money. And they don't care about the controversies with Rowling, or simply that there was already a successful, iconic movie series based on it. They want a 10-season readaptation of the books, leaving out not a single line. And even I have come around to saying, well, if it's an even more faithful adaptation, it's for little kids, and it was 20 years ago for a whole generation has been born who didn't grow up with it. I can maybe kind of separate on an intellectual level because I haven't seen it yet. Maybe we can separate this out and go, okay, they do make remakes. I mean, how many times do they make a new Batman movie? Okay, this will be for a new generation. Obviously, it's a cash grab, but kind of. But it's untested, and they're prioritizing it over all of their other projects. So I don't know. But on top of that, they said, we are going to have major tie-ins between the new Harry Potter series, which is casting and filming this year for coming out in a year or two. It'll heavily tie in with the video game. And again, that makes sense. If you have a new cast, the cast does voice work for the video game when they make cameos in it, when you cross paths with them. Difference is that they announced that Hogwarts Legacy 2 will be a live service game. Because they want that sweet, sweet live service money. They want that gravy train. Even though their development team keeps telling them, we don't have the capacity to do that. Infrastructure-wise, are you going to buy more servers and bigger staff to sustain a live service thing? Now, in my other bigger State of Warner video, I talked about how their internal reorganization was going, how their top divisions were movie studios, cable networks, and then direct to consumer is the combined streaming plus premier cable subscription things, HBO, and this does make sense. HBO isn't really like an ad-supported cable channel. You get a subscription for it, and then you have it for a period of time. It's a similar release model to getting a Max subscription. So, okay, things you get ongoing subscriptions for like that, like HBO, the cable channel, or Max, go under direct-to-consumer. Under the old system, video games were under movies, which kind of makes sense because it's a big project, thinking like a Mass Effect game. You work on it for 3 years and it has one giant release. That you have to plan it out years in advance and it has one big release. Under the new system, WB Games is no longer part of the studio division. It's part of the streaming division. It reports to the streamer people because this is holding up a sign telling the world, going forward, we are focused on video games as an ongoing subscription for live service. It's not like movies. The video games they're going to churn out are going to be things prioritizing subscriptions. Because, well, it's live service. Look how much money we're getting. And I can even kind of see that work. Again, there is an argument for this. It's profitable. Harry Potter is a big franchise. Maybe we can remake it. That's a whole separate question of remaking the TV show. But we have objective criticism from your own development team that you don't have the infrastructure in place to make a live service game even for Harry Potter. But they're betting the farm on it. So that is the big question of, given the flop of Suicide Squad, how do you intend to make this a live service game? I don't know. So there's an argument of, on the one hand, they think that'll print money. On the other hand, maybe they should sell their video games division. Or, third possibility is that they sell every franchise except Harry Potter, or, treat the IP separately of the top 4 they have. If they sell the Game of Thrones IP to EA or whatever, or Mortal Kombat out to Ubisoft or whatever. But look, Harry Potter is the jewel in the crown, we'll keep that in-house. I can sort of see the argument for that. But even then, it's the third party will give you money instantly at a time you need money, and they can do a better job. So, this is a pretty precarious position we're in. That one way or another, even if we the fans were in charge right now, we wouldn't get a Dragon Age scale video game for 3 years, more like 5, because it takes time to make, because they're starting a whole new series that I would expect more time. It's not just like a sequel they're churning out. It's a new thing, new video game world for Game of Thrones that hasn't really had much experience with it. So I expect there to be just mobile games just to keep the name out in the public. That is, I would do that. I agree that's a good marketing idea, if nothing else. Don't think too much of them, of course. But from a business standpoint, they are not really making money on this, and it's better spent on their streaming TV service, which is, as I went over in the main video, this is officially what's driving your profits, not the other stuff. Related to this is that the article saying you need to sell off some of your assets mentioned the video game division paired with a separate international cable thing. They just mentioned these as it's not a video game thing, but it's things you could quickly sell. The articles I've read, and this is going on for months of speculation since that flop earnings report they had in August, said the 3 suggestions were: 1, focus on Max. 2, sell WB Games, you could get $5 billion for it, cash in hand. 3, a couple of years ago, Discovery bought up a cable channel in Poland, TVN. Now keep in mind that cable is still a lot bigger outside of the United States, or the top like G7 countries, that it's still, it's not quite on its way out. There's more infrastructure in place for it. It is, and it's not just about growth, it's about profit ratio, that it was reasonably profitable when they bought it. And shout out in the comments if you're watching this from Poland, you know what TVN is, that they have this cable channel in Poland, and okay, you bought it on the cheap. It might be profitable relative to itself, but you want to be expanding into streaming. That's the future. Same market analysis articles I read that said you could sell the game division for $5 billion said you could sell TVN for $1 billion cash in hand. When you're $35 billion in debt and are slashing budgets from your flagship streaming shows, that would make quite a difference. Even $1 billion. Imagine the money they could pump back into the Westeros franchise. The news that came out over Christmas is about 1 week before Christmas, like 1 month ago. They actually did start the process of putting TVN up for sale in Poland. And because that was mentioned in the same breath as the video game division, the same market and analyst saying sell Poland's TVN network said they should sell the video game division. Is this an indication that they might be more willing to sell WB Games in the near future? Maybe. Again, because a lot of their big plans are for the Harry Potter Hogwarts 2 to tie in with the new Harry Potter TV show. And I think, given the licensing fees, why not just sell it and continue to make Hogwarts Legacy with a third party and have it tie in with the TV show? You get licensing fees, it's just they can make it better than you can and you get some money from it. If you insist on making it yourself, it might flop. The age-old story of the dad who says, I don't need to take the car into a mechanic, I can fix it myself a lot cheaper. If, emphasis is on if you can do that, it is cheaper, but can you? At quality, we don't know. So that's what's going on with video games at the moment. Reasonably, we would not expect a real video game for any of this for till 2027, 2028. That's just how long it takes to make a good one, and I understand that. But from a business standpoint, they really need to sell that to a third-party developer who knows what they're doing. I apologize for splicing this in roughly at the end here, right before my conclusion, but after I recorded this video, as I was editing it together on Thursday, there was major breaking news that the head of WB Games is in fact going to resign. David Haddad, who has been in charge of their video game division for 12 years. He's been in charge since 2012. His tenure covers basically the entire run of Game of Thrones. I mean, because they didn't know if Season 1 would be a hit or not, and it takes time to make video games. You'd think they'd start discussing Game of Thrones tie-ins in earnest by, Season 2, 2012. And he didn't exactly serve us well because there's just been a string of false starts, not real attempts to make tie-in video games. The one good one was a third-party, Telltale, not him. And all of the controversies of his run, and he's out. And there's other people reporting on this. He's had a mixed career, that yes, he was in charge during Suicide Squad. That was mostly due to inaction. Others are saying he was the guy who really pushed for making Hogwarts Legacy and ensured its quality. So, genuinely mixed legacy there, but one way or another he's out and they're looking for new blood. That they didn't fire him in shame and say, get out of here, this is major failure. He's had his ups and downs, so let him down gently with, voluntary, pressure to retire, but gave him 3 months. They said he will stay around for 3 months to ensure a smooth transition to whoever the new person is. So it's going to be a process, which is good. It's better than bluntly dropping him and just then desperately looking for something, and they're not in the middle of a major release right now. Still, this is pretty big news that the head of their video game division since forever, for 12 years, is out and they're looking for new people. As reported in Variety, the one other piece of info is they said, everyone we talked to in our sources stressed to us that this is not a prelude to selling WB Games. And to that I say, well, that's what they always say, that's exactly the sort of thing I'd expect someone who's about to sell would be saying, that they're not going to admit to it. So there's no real way of telling one way or the other. I mean, I'm not saying, oh, they're definitely going to sell. It's just we have no idea. They wouldn't admit to that. But if nothing else, even if they're not selling, there are, in fact, going to be major shakeups at their video game division. That Warner, the heads at Warner Discovery overall, like Zaslav, were kind of coasting along the past 2, almost 3 years since the merger, but they finally turned their attention to the video game division and went, you know, you guys are really not cranking out good content. We have no Game of Thrones content of merit. And they're looking for a new person, so I think this is actually them following through on their promise to take video game expansion more seriously, replacing someone who's the head of the division for 12 years. That is a major shakeup. So there's going to be a lot of motion on this. This is breaking news. They might announce something in coming weeks. Whenever the new person comes in, they said 3 months or so. By later this spring, we might see at the spring round of press panels they have in March, April. For all we know, they might be announcing a new Game of Thrones project, but the whole point of my video is stressing, I understand. They said when we order something on the scale of Mass Effect or Dragon Age, it takes 3 to 4 years to actually make it. So even if they announce it, don't expect it for a while, like a major theatrical movie, but this is huge news. So stay tuned for that. Now again, I'm not a video game channel. I tried researching all this. I know vaguely of what the top 10 developers are. Look at the description box where I link to these other videos of people reviewing the Kings Road video game, mobile game, and then what happened to Suicide Squad and what's going on with WB Games. And then if you know more than I do, please speculate in the comments. If they were to sell WB Games to someone else, who do you feel would be the best third party fitted to the content they have? Harry Potter, DC Comics, Mortal Kombat, Game of Thrones. And Game of Thrones could be a couple of things. I've repeatedly said, my idea for a Game of Thrones tie-in game, because it can be, video games are basically two things. They're either you play as Luke Skywalker, or an original story set in the Star Wars universe. My idea was, because it was free to play, have you ever heard of MechWarrior 4 Mercenaries? Where you're a mercenary company going throughout the galaxy, taking contracts, and you have to balance your budget for buying more weapons, almost like an RPG. Given that a big focus in Game of Thrones isn't the fight between good and evil, but there's a lot of mercenary companies, my idea was, make a game about a sellsword company, where you're a mercenary that gradually increases the size of your company. I'm thinking of the Golden Company, or the Second Sons. A big part of the 5th book, it really got me going on this, is when Tyrion is with the Second Sons, and a big part of this is he's with Inkpots, who's the quartermaster. And he's a vital part of the Second Sons, because he runs the numbers. He works out, do we have enough money to get so many logistical needs, the realistic logistics of running a mercenary company. So that would be like an economy boost in gamer terms of, well, this faction has the better quartermaster, so hire the better quartermaster, it'll pay off in the long run, that kind of thing. It would also have first-person combat in it, but I'm thinking of MechWarrior Mercenaries, where there was combat, but there was also play balancing what you buy. And because in-universe there are constant wars between the free cities, they say there's always fighting in the Stepstones, there's always fighting between Lys and Mir, and the Triarchy, and Bravos, and Volantis. Just have someone being a sellsword working their way up the ranks. On top of that, I realized since then that because A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms is coming out, a big focus going forward on a scale of years is going to be about Dunk and Egg, and that Dunk is sort of a mercenary. He's a hedge knight. Well, the idea is a hedge knight is a wandering knight who accepts service in exchange for food and lodging, in the hope that if he acquits himself well, they'll hire him long term. Not unlike he's kind of like an intern, but there is overlap between hedge knights and sellsword mercenaries. There are hedge knights who fight in sellsword companies in the East in Essos for a couple of years, then come back. So my idea for a tie-in video game on a scale of years is have someone be a hedge knight who, as the levels advance, you join sellsword companies and Essos because they're not going to make another war on the scale of the Dance of the Dragons or the scale of the Blackfire Rebellion even. But if you want to advance to the point where your troop of hedge knights and sellswords fight in a full-scale war with like 100 characters fighting like an RPG, eventually they fight in the Stepstones or they fight in the Free Cities. And I keep thinking that's a really good idea because it ties in with the Dunk and Egg series that's coming up of what is it like to be this wandering mercenary turned into sellsword company. So that's how I would make a game rather than I'm another person who happened to cross paths with Jon Snow. Seems repetitive. That's how I would do it, just going back to the Mech Warrior Mercenaries model. But also tell me in the comments there's other things they could do. And as the other videos I'm linked to pointed out, it's shameful that the best video games we have are those Crusader Kings fan mods for Westeros things, for Total War and other stuff, are kind of what people want to make. And dude, look at what the fans want instead of going, well, we could make a Crusader Kings knockoff, but no, let's make a live service game and tell people that they should purchase a subscription to it. They're only gonna buy it if it's good. If they've stripped it down to the point it's just, give me money. Oh look, it's DC Suicide Squad with purchasable guns and vehicles. Dude, you're just ripping off Destiny, I'm not gonna buy this. Make something that fits the universe. I'm a strong believer in if you build a better mousetrap, the world beats a path to your door. That you can't just keep relying on trickery like that. So, if they were to sell to a developer that you are more familiar with from other games that you have played, who would you prefer that they sell WB games to, if they even sell it? And other ideas for what would be good Westeros games, realizing these might not even appear for 3 or 5 years. So I'm going to try to respond to all the comments, and please like and subscribe.